Greetings, dear colleagues. My name is Alina Petrushka, and today I'm presenting a study on negative citing scenario analysis of inaccurate evaluation of scientific content, which was co-authored with Maria Komova. The research investigates the influence of variability in the implementation of scientific communication on the quality of application of traditional metrics based on accounting the number of publications and their citations. Consider the context of the citation. The development of a new alternative metrics or the improvement of existing ones is an important methodological problem of modern bibliometric research. The search for a new solutions makes it obvious that the existing methodological tools fail to adequately and comprehensively create an evaluative picture of the scientific information space. So, the purpose of the study is to conduct a scenario analysis of the realization of methodological risk of negative citing when using traditional metrics for evaluating scientific content. To achieve this goal, the following tasks were performed: conducting a scenario analysis of the basic citation analysis to form the conceptual basis of the study, formation of principles of realization variative component of citation analysis, taking into account the risk of negative citing, conducting a scenario analysis of the citation scheme, taking into account the risk of negative citing, and developing the algorithm for the implementation of variative citation analysis. The main research methodology is the method of the scenario analysis, which was used to analyze the realization of the methodological risk of negative citing in the process of evaluating scientific content by traditional metrics. Generally, recent research and publications deals with the potential and limitations of traditional metrics and altmetrics for evaluating the researcher, use of traditional metrics and altmetrics for evaluating scientific editions, alternative approaches to the implementation of scientific analysis, and relationship between altmetrics and features of scientific activity. Analysis of the recent research and publications shows that traditional metrics such as H-index serve as a basis for the evaluating the impact of the individual researcher. At the same time, the obvious shortcomings of a quantitative evaluation based on citation analysis and limitations of providing a qualitative component of scientific impact assessment require the improvement of existing metrics or the formation of new approaches. The citation itself, as a basis of bibliometric research, requires a rethinking and revision of approaches to its identification and evaluation. In recent years, there has been a tendency to combine the tools of traditional and alternative metrics to provide quantitative and qualitative components of the evaluation of scientific content. However, the methodologies for implementation citation analysis, both within traditional and alternative approaches, do not provide for the identification and consideration of the context of citations, namely the identification of negative evaluative judgments of the authors of the citation. Let's consider the main research result. Assume that some primary sources were cited in certain secondary sources and makes up the set PS represented by the equation 1, where NPS is the number of primary sources in the set PS with power set represented by the equation 2. The fact of citing is considered as the implementation of the communication process between the author of the primary sources and the authors of the secondary sources. As a result of this scientific communication, the linked citations CPS appears between the certain primary source and the corresponding secondary source. Citability of primary sources can be represented by countable sets of citations. Please see equations from 3 to 5, where NCPS1, NCPS2, and NCPSJ are the numbers of citations to primary sources, PS1, PS2, and PSJ accordingly, in the sets citps1, citps2, and citpsj with the power sets represented by the equitation from 6 to 8. Moreover, the sets of citations citps1, citps2, and citpsj do not intersect. The set of citations to all primary sources form a cumulative set of citations citcum, which subsets are sets of citations to each primary source. Please see equation 9. Power set of cumulative set is determined by the sum of the subsets power sets and represented by the equation 10. The above scenario analysis of the basic citation analysis for the evaluation of scientific content can be represented by the general scheme given on figure 1. Quantitative assessment of the importance of the primary source is determined by the corresponding power sets of the set of citations like citps1, citps2, and citpsj. The importance of scientific publication is the greater is the power set of the set of its citations. Quantitative assessment of the influence of the researchers is determined by the power set of the set of publications, PS, power set of the cumulative set of citations, citcum, and scatter of the power set values of the sets of citations, citps1, citps2, and citpsj. The level of publishing activity is the higher, the greater is the power set of the set of publications, PS. Cumulative citation index of the researcher is the greater is the power set of the cumulative set of citation citcum. And researcher's age index is the greater is the power set of the citation sets citps1, citps2, and citpsj, with minimal scatter of their values and high publishing activity. The considered basic citation scheme illustrates the idealized process of scientific communication. It involves reviewing the results of scientific activities without taking into account the qualitative assessment of the citation. It is obvious that the basic citation analysis, which forms the methodological apparatus of traditional metrics, does not cover the possible variability of the results of scientific communication. That's why the importance of a scientific publication and the impact of the researcher can't be adequately assessed by only the power set of the set of publications and citations. To increase the objectivity of the evaluation of scientific content, the concept of variative citation analysis was proposed and the possible methodological risk of traditional metrics were identified. Consider the scheme of realization of the risk of negative citing, which arises due to the neglect of the context of citing. A variative component of the evaluation of scientific content with taking into account the risk of negative citing involves identifying the context of citing. Within the research of the subject area the following stages are distinguished. Identification and accounting of negative citing, which makes it possible to establish a marker of the scientifics belonging to the risk group of negative sightings, indication of citation with negative context to establish the weight of the marker of negative citing, and verification of negative citing. At this stage, an unambiguous verdict is made on the presence or absence of negative citing of the publication based on the analysis of the reasons for criticism. Identification and accounting of negative citing involve the transition from the identification of citation as bibliographic records in the list of references to the analysis of the contextual group of physical attributes of citation directly in full text secondary sources. Identification and accounting of negative citing involve identifying contextual groups of physical attributes of citation. The methodological tool for this process can be a method of sentiment analysis. It allows, in an automated mode, use computational linguistics to detect the presence of emotionally colored and evaluative statements of the authors about a particular object. The fact of detecting a marker of negative citing necessitates the indication and verification of negative citation for further study of a particular subject area. Indication of negative citing implies its parameterization. Negative citing parameterization is the quantification of identified citations using an indicator that correlates the number of citations with a negative response and compares with the weights of the negative citing marker. For ease of evaluation, this indicator should be a dimensionally quantity coefficient, for example, that can vary within certain limits. This will allow forming unambiguous judgments about the importance of negative citing. To indicate citation with a negative response, we propose to use the coefficient of negative citing, which is represented by equation 11 and is a ratio of the number of citations with a negative context to the total number of citations. Depending on the number of identified negative citations, the coefficient of negative citations can vary from 0 to 1. The greater is the number of identified negative citations, the greater is the value of coefficient. It can be used to indicate a negative citing of a single publication and set of publications. To determine the significance of the negative citing marker in a particular subject area, the expert must also take into account the social impact of the scientific publication. Under the social influence, we understand the consequence of the particular implementation of scientific research on the living conditions, life quality, life expectancy, and health of a person, of society as a whole. For example, it is obvious that from the point of view of social impact, negative citing in the field of medicine, for example, is more important than in the humanities. Expert discipline differentiation of the indication of negative citing allows grading the weight of the marker of negative citing to establish the maximum allowable value of the number of citations with a negative response. So experts should determine the limit value of the coefficient of negative citings for each subject area. Verification of a negative citing is a complex cognitive process that involves expert assessment of the contextual field of the citation. This process requires a high level of competence, objectivity, professionalism, scientific intuition, and adherence to moral and ethical standards. We believe that the key aspects of expert assessment of negative citings are motivational, within which the expert analyzes the motivation of the negative response, and discipline, within which the expert determines the importance of the marker of negative citing in a particular subject area. Let's consider an example of the risk of negative citation in assessing the importance of a scientific publication. By the basic citation analysis, it was found that the scientific publication primary source was cited and CPS times. According to the methodology of traditional metrics, the importance of a publication is determined by its citation. That is, the cumulative set of citation CitCum, which is formed by all references to the publication outside the context of citation, the measure of the publication's citability without taking into account the risk of negative citing is the power set of the cumulative set of citation. Please see equation 12. To take into account the risk of negative citing, we move on to the variative component of the evaluation. As a result of the analysis of the tonality of the text of the context field of citations and CIT plus PS, citation with a positive or neutral response, and 8 CIT minus PS, citation with a negative response, to the primary source were identified. In this case, the citability of primary source is represented by a set of positive citations and a set of negative citations. Please see equations 13 and 14. The union of those sets forms a cumulative set of all citations. The above scenario analysis of the variative citation analysis for the evaluation of scientific content can be represented by the general scheme given on figure 2. The fact of identification of citation with a negative context is defined as a marker of the scientists belonging to the risk group of negative citing. This necessitates the indication using the coefficient of negative citing and expert assessment. In general, the process of implementing a variable citation analysis taking into account the negative citation can be described by the following algorithm given on the figure 3. As a result of the variative citation analysis taking into account the possibility of negative citing, only citation with a positive or neutral context will be selected for the evaluation of the researcher impact. And the fact of identification of negative citation must be taken into account when assessing the quality of scientific content. A slice of modern bibliometric research indicates the urgent need to develop a new alternative metrics or improve existing ones. The methodological basis for quantitative assessment of the authority and demand for scientific content is a basic citation analysis, which involves the identification and accounting of citation of the primary source based on the content analysis of bibliographic references in secondary sources. The considered basis citation scheme illustrates the idealized process of scientific communication. It does not take into account the contextual field of the citation and does not cover the possible variability of the results of scientific communication. To increase the objectivity of the evaluation of scientific content, it is necessary to move to a variative level of citation analysis. It involves the identification and consideration of possible methodological risk of traditional metrics. Implementation of variative component of scientific content evaluation to take into account the risk of negative citing involves identifying a marker of scientists' risk group of negative citing, verifying negative citing and analyzing the reasons for criticism, and indicating negative citing to establish the weight of the marker in the certain subject area. Combining the results of expert evaluation and parameterization will reduce the level of subjectivity of the indication of negative citation. The proposed methods of variative citation analysis is developed to identify the risk of negative citation when evaluating the quality of scientific content. The use of variative citation analysis will allow to increase the objectivity of evaluating the authority and impact of the researcher and the quality of scientific content and the quantitative and qualitative levels, and to return the scientific discourse into the direction of an objective, critical assessment of scientific achievements. Based on the results of the study, an algorithm for the implementation of variative citation analysis was developed, which can be implemented in the tools of modern bibliometric systems for the identification and accounting of citation. The method of variative citation analysis requires further development at the empirical level. Thank you for your attention.